What's up, everybody? Matt Kajeski here, back again with the Stokastic DFS channel, talking college football again. It's week 11, and we've got a Friday slate. 3 games, pretty generous for a Friday. Before we get started, make sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you know when this and all other content goes live. We're also brought to you today by Prize Picks, and if you've never heard of Prize Picks, daily prop-based offerings. You're making lineups of player props, that's overs and unders, on all the major statistical categories: passing yards, rushing yards, touchdowns, you name it, they have it, and they have it across sports. So you can go into your lineups and you can mix and match entries from the NFL with college football, with NBA, whatever it is, you can do it. It's lineups up to 5 players where you can 10 extra entry fee. But better yet, they have a bonus for you guys. If you click the link in the video description below and make your first deposit, you're going to get a match deposit bonus up to $100 and 1 free month of Stokastic Plus Platinum. So make sure to check that out in the link below. It is in the video description. All right, let's dive into the slate. It's 3 games, and it's a good slate. Here's our data usage tool behind the glass. If you've watched these videos for a long time, you're familiar with this. But up at the top, we've got pace, we've got pass rate, offensive, defensive, line interactions, Vegas data, and then where these defenses allow production. Let's dive into the games. So first off, we've got East Carolina taking on Cincinnati, a phenomenal game in the AAC. And we're blessed to have this on a Friday. Can't wait for this game. Again, 5.5 point spread in favor of Cincinnati, 52.5 total. East Carolina, the away team, they rank 77th in pace, 54% pass rate. Holton Allairs is really cheap in this game. He's just getting a significant decrease in price, I think, because of matchup here. The guy averages 292 yards per game through the air on 36 attempts. He's mobile. He has 132 rushing yards. At first glance, you see this, and there's 2 things that stand out. One, it's like, oh, he's playing Cincinnati. Cincinnati's had a pretty good defense this year, even though they played a weak schedule. And the other thing that stands out is, holy smokes, Holton Allairs is really cheap on this. Like, Holton Allairs is an awesome floor. I think, he's the best outside of like Caleb Williams, who we'll talk about, probably just the best floor across all the quarterbacks on this slate. So I'm going to play Holton Allairs. He's 10K on FanDuel. DraftKings, he's 5,400. Really, really cheap price on Allairs. Shocking to see. Anyway, the running game, they lost Rajai Harris. They've used Keaton Mitchell as a bell cow, and he's now averaging 18 touches per game, 108 rushing yards. He's a really good pass catcher. He averages another 17 yards there. Keaton Mitchell, I think, is a top 2 running back play on the slate. You also have Marlon Gunn as a GPP option at the Stone Min. Marlon Gunn is playing. He does have a role here. He's averaging 9 touches per game, 43 yards. Marlon Gunn is going to see some touches, whether they're in close games or not. So I think we can have a little more confidence in the Gunn role. I don't prefer him to Mitchell. I think the ceiling's questionable, but if you need a min-price guy, Gunn he's in there. In the receiving game, Isaiah Winstead and CJ Johnson are the 1 and the 2 pretty clearly here. Winstead averages 10 targets per game, 97 yards. CJ Johnson right behind him, 6 targets per game, 78 yards. They're at different price points. I think you mix and match these guys. I'm trying to play at least one. They're both awesome. From there, it gets tricky. Ryan Jones is their full-time tight end. He averages 5 targets per game, 40 yards. He's locked in. 1 for 1, I'd rather play Johnson. Johnson's only 200 more. But once you get behind Jones, this is where it gets tricky, because Shane Calhoun, their second tight end, warmed up for their last game. This team uses a lot of 12 personnel when they have Calhoun. They just haven't had him in recent weeks. They also haven't had their wide receiver 3, Jalen Johnson, who played in their second most recent game, missed their most recent game again. And all of this has allowed Josiah Hatfield to play a full-time role. So it's kind of 2 factors that have thrust Josiah Hatfield into a full-time role: the injury to tight end 2, Shane Calhoun, and the injury to wide receiver 3, Jalen Johnson. I think if either of those players returns, it hurts Hatfield and this becomes a rotation. If all 3 of those players are healthy, I don't want any part of this, and I would rather stick to Winstead, Johnson, and Jones. So there's a little bit of injury news to monitor for East Carolina, but it's not a ton. It's pretty tertiary, if you will, but that's where we stand. On the Cincinnati side, Ben Bryant, quarterbacking an offense that ranks 60th in pace with a 55.5% pass rate. He's fairly cheap here too. You just have to really navigate the negative rushing yards, negative 102 yards. It's playing with a significant handicap for DFS, so he basically has to 300-yard bonus to get you a ceiling, and he's only averaging 264 yards per game on 33.5 attempts. So Bryant, at his price, I would just flat out rather play Holton Allairs. So he's He's GPP viable for sure, but definitely risky. The backfield, I think Corey Kiner's still injured. He barely played last week, only a couple snaps for him. Charles McClellan really handled all the work in the backfield. He had 14 touches. Again, all the other backs had just 2 combined carries. I think it's McClellan or bust right now just because we don't know how healthy Kiner is. Ryan Montgomery's not playing a lot. 1 carry for him, no targets. So it's Charles McClellan right now. And this matchup, it's not great. East Carolina actually plays pretty good defense across the board. If they are weak anywhere, it's against the pass. But we don't know about the rotation with Kiner's health, so it just makes it risky. In the pass game, Tyler Scott is awesome. Since he's come back from that ankle sprain, I believe it was, he was in a boot earlier this year. Maybe it was a foot injury. But 6,500, he's now seen 9 and 12 targets in back-to-back games. I think we can have confidence that he's healthier. 83 yards per game on 8.3 targets. He's just flat out awesome. And he takes advantage of the weakness of East Carolina's defense. Trey Tucker's the 2 pretty clearly. For whatever reason, the game Tyler Scott missed, everybody played him in DFS and he only had 4 targets. But since then, 13 targets and 6 targets. I don't know what it was, but it seems like a blip on the radar. Trey Tucker's been solid outside of that one game where he was just the pure chalk. So tough to see, but 7.1 targets per game for Tucker, 60 yards. I think he's fine. From there, it becomes a pretty nasty rotation. They're going to rotate Josh Wiley with Leonard Taylor. They're going to rotate Jaden Thompson with Nick Mardner, with Will Pauling to some degree. Not too much Will Pauling, but I guess I'll read you the routes and you can make your own decision. Josh Wiley, 68% of the routes. Tight end 2, Leonard Taylor. He was at 57%. Wide receiver 3, Jaden Thompson, 65% of the routes. Wide receiver 4, Nick Mardner, 32%. Will Pauling, 24%, just for those of you that care. But Trey Tucker, his routes have bounced out a little bit more than Tyler Scott. So, like up at the top, if you are trying to pick one, it's still Tyler Scott for me. But beyond Scott and Tucker, it's pretty tough to decipher their rotation. Colorado, USC, 34-point spread, 66 total. This game is going to be tricky to navigate. For Colorado, there's conflicting reports about quarterback, but I don't think McCown plays. He's still hurt, 1. He's not a full participant in practice. And 2, I think they're trying to preserve his red shirt. So McCown shouldn't play. Brandon Lewis is already gone. So JT Shroud is the only man left. He's not very good, to say the least. He can't run the ball. He has negative 17 rush yards. He's really lackluster as a passer. This team does throw 51% of the time, so at least that's there. The backfield's also nasty as it comes. Deion Smith had been their lead back for 1 game at least. He got hurt in their most recent contest, so he only touched the ball 5 times before he left. Alex Fontenot returned, and he led the rest of the group. But Anthony Hankerson's still there. Jalen Stacks. Charlie Offerdahl, when he's healthy, he hasn't been. So I have 5 running backs here. Just ignore it for the most part. Receiving game, this is really tricky because you've had Daniel Arias get benched for drops and fumbles, but then their wide receiver 1, Jordan Tyson, went down last week. He's out for the year. He had averaged 9 targets per game over the last 4, which vacates a ton of opportunity. The only player that had a full-time role other than Tyson was Montana Lamonius Craig, who was averaging 6 targets per game over the last 4. He should immediately become their wide receiver 1, assuming Daniel Arias is still in the doghouse. I wouldn't expect to see a lot of Arias either way. I think the wide receiver 2 is going to be RJ Sneed here. He's averaging 15 yards per game, which is horrific, but he's now seen 3.8 targets per game in the last 3. Tight end Brady Russell's in a rotation, but he's seen 7, 4, and 5 targets in the last 3 games if you just want really cheap target volume. From there, it's just terrible to target. I mean, Maurice Bell, Ty Robinson. I've heard some Chase Penry talk this week. Penry hasn't been targeted in the last 4 games. I don't know who it's going to be. To rank who's left, it's going to be number 1, Montana Lamonius Craig. I think he's actually somewhat playable at 3,600. Number 2, RJ Sneed. Number 3, Brady Russell. Anything after that, I think, is just pure dart throw territory. USC, difficult to navigate, not because they're not awesome. I mean, this team is sick. They're really efficient, 74th in pace, 53.5% pass rate. But injuries have been really, really impactful to this team. Luckily, Caleb Williams isn't hurt. I think at 9,400, he's probably just a guy you pencil into your lineup because this team's a 50 total. He doesn't even need to play really past halftime for him to hit value on a 3-game slate. He's mobile, 287 rushing yards. He's averaging 305 as a passer. Doesn't matter if Jordan Addison or Mario Williams play. He's been efficient regardless, which brings us to the injuries here. Jordan Addison and Mario Williams, They were talking this week about their injury status, saying they're much closer to playing than last week. These guys are going to return. I'm not sure if it happens here. Colorado, weakest team in the conference. So, I mean, you could really have the luxury of just holding these guys out again if you're worried about the injury status. Maybe we see cameo appearances, but regardless, I don't think we see full-time roles. And plus, they're really deep. I mean, we've got transfers across the board here. Taj Washington, former Memphis transfer. He saw 11 targets in their last game, 9 the game before. Got Terrell Bynum from Washington. He saw 9 targets in their last game. There's players here. So I'll read you the routes because it's honestly probably a rotation regardless. And it's not a pretty one at that. So last week, you had Taj Washington, 61% of the routes. He's now been at 60% or above in 4 straight games. So I think he is the most consistent. You had Brendan Rice dropping to 34%. I don't believe it was injury related, but now he has fallen from 75 to 52 to 34%. Not good for Brendan Rice. That's kind of coincided with Terrell Bynum getting healthy. So I don't know if they wanted this to happen regardless, but Terrell Bynum's now gone from 35% to 65% to 64%. Bynum is a more consistent receiver at this point. Kyle Ford's more consistent. He is a 48% and 66% route share over the last 2 games. Even Michael Jackson, 58% to 75% last 2 games. If I'm ranking these guys, it's going to be Taj 1. 10, this is assuming we don't see Jordan Addison or Mario Williams. I'm going to say Taj 1, 2 Bynum, 3 Jackson, 4 Brendan Rice. Do not feel good about it, as you can probably tell by the tone in my voice. Kyle Ford would be 5. Don't feel good about that ranking, but again, I'll say Taj 1, Terrell Bynum 2, Michael Jackson 3, Brendan Rice 4, Kyle Ford 5. Okay. Backfield. Travis Dye, he's really the only back seeing significant work lately. Maybe you see Austin Jones pop back up because of game script here. I mean, they're nearly 5 touchdown favorites, but Travis Dye is one of the best ceiling floor combos on the slate. He has exactly 3 targets in 4 straight games. He's fine. I think you just play Travis Dye when you can. Otherwise, Raleek Brown and Austin Jones are your change of pace guys. Let's go to our last game. It's Fresno taking on UNLV. 9.5 point spread for Fresno. They're on the road. 60.5 total here. This game is actually semi-exciting. It's sneaky. And I don't think people are going to play it as much. Fresno State, 66th in pace, 51% pass rate. Jake Haener under center. He's back. He's averaging 315 yards. I would say he's clearly the quarterback 2 on the slate if he didn't have such negative rushing numbers. Negative 51 yards, Haener. It sucks because he's so awesome as a passer, but you have to play with that handicap right from the start. And you just don't with Allaire. So it's close between these two. You can save 2K by going to Allaire. So that's my preference as quarterback 2 for my lineups. But Haener arguably has a higher ceiling. So Haener's fine. He's easy to stack. I mean, you're either using Jalen Moreno Cropper or Nico Remigio. I prefer Cropper 1-for-1. He's just more involved. Target-wise, yardage-wise, route-wise. But Remigio should be the 2 here. And then from there, it gets kind of tricky for this team. They have had some injuries. So I think Josh Kelly coming back, he might eventually work his way into this wide receiver 2 role again. So again, it had been Moreno, Cropper 1, Remigio 2, and then we'd seen Eric Brooks operate as the 3 recently, but his routes dropped from 74% to 42%. That kind of coincided with Josh Kelly coming back. Josh Kelly was at 19%, then he went back up to 42%. Prior to the injury, Josh Kelly was the wide receiver 2 for this team. So I think he's going to continue rising. Eric Brooks, he's risky based on the route drop. Then you had Zane Pope. He was at 78%. He also dropped to 55%. But again, just their most recent game, outside of Cropper and Remigio, you had Zane Pope 3rd at 55%. Then you had Josh Kelly and Eric Brooks tied at 42%. So I'm going to give the edge to Kelly just based on the prior body of work here. But it's close. It's close. They're almost identical in price too, which doesn't help. So you got to make some tough decisions with these ancillary Fresno guys. Raymond Powell's is the tight end. He's just about 50% route player. Backfield, Jordan Mims and Malik Sherrod form a 1-2 punch. So this is similar to, I don't know, it's kind of like the ECU situation with Gunn and Keaton, but I think you have a little bit wider of a gap here slightly between Mims and Sherrod. Mims averaging 89 yards per game. Decent pass catcher too. He has 18 targets in the year. Malik Sherrod, he's kind of volatile, but he's averaging 6.7 touches per game. He's also 4,500. So, like, I would rather play Gunn in a vacuum because of that, but he's at least someone we need to talk about, say his name. On the UNLV side, Doug Brumfeld is back. Well, let's talk about UNLV's team first. They're 84th in pace, 48% pass rate. Brumfeld, 5,200, really cheap here. He's mobile. He has 142 yards. He's averaging 205 per game as a passer on 26 attempts. It's more of a low volume passing attack than some of the other teams on this slate. Tough matchup too. Got a decent defense in Fresno. They're also getting back some players in that secondary, which should help them. But at 5,200, I think Brumfeld's live for tournaments. His mobility keeps him in play. He also has awesome receivers. I mean, I've been buying low on this UNLV team all season long, with the exception of when they were all hurt. But I mean, he's got Michigan State transfer Ricky White leading the team. 61 yards per game on 7.7 targets. Kyle Williams is back from injury. 9 targets in back-to-back games since his return. 52 yards per game for him on 7.3 targets. Jeff Weimer has been practicing. Maybe he returns. He was the wide receiver 3 before injury. But even without Weimer, they just have inserted Nick Williams clearly as the wide receiver 3. He's 3,600. Somewhat viable in that case. Weimer would become viable too if he plays. He was clearly the 3 before going down. So I do have some interest in these UNLV players that are not going to be owned very much. And then Aiden Robbins, excellent running back play, 6,200. He came back from his knee injury and immediately touched the ball 22 times. He's averaging 20.5 touches per game, 89 rushing yards per game, and then another 10 as a receiver. So even though they're underdogs, he's had an excellent role regardless of game script. I think he is fine. But that'll do it for us with the Stokastic channel. Let me know in the comment section what you think of these plays, what you think of these games, if you agree, disagree. I'd love to hear it, and just your overall thoughts as well. And then if you'd like to, you can reach out to me on Twitter. I'm at Matt_Kajeski. Before we head out of here, hit the thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel. It helps us a ton. And if you've already done that, thank you. I appreciate it. Otherwise, we've got the main slate tomorrow. Make sure to check that out. Until then, good luck, guys. We'll see you later.